support that, I'm gonna kick him out. But like, let people speak. Maybe they'll change their mind. Or you can change their mind. I said that I like what I like about you. You just let everyone say whatever they want to say.
I mean, it wasn't free. Like, I did pledge my loyalty to Queen Isa, Queen of the Jews.
No, she didn't. I mean, not everyone, because there are people that get killed. But I think it's more interesting to have conversations, with them and try to kind of like expose their stupidity. I love doing that. Scandal was not too.
I mean, there's people that comes with hate.
Those I like. I just go like, oh, you fucking idiot, you're gonna die. I mean, like, there is no conversation to have with them, so, like resistance. There's no conversation that can be had with resistance because he doesn't want to.
Yeah.
I heard he was Muslim.
He converted.
No, actually, I heard he actually was Afghani.
What?
I think he's actually Afghani, based on his name.
No. He is Dominican.
That's what people used to say, but once he got doxxed, he's got, like you said,
No, I talked to him, and he kind of, he speaks Spanish. I think I've spoken Spanish with him.
Do you know what his real name is? Because I do.
No, I don't. But he sounded very, very Dominican to me.
If everybody in New York.
No, but I know that the accents, our accents.
That's literally everyone in a good chunk of New York.
Yeah, I know, but there are a lot of Dominicans in New York.
Yes, the Italians who live next door to them also send them in to you.
I don't know. But, I don't think he's Afghani. It might be, but, like, there are specific things, in, like, the way they speak, the use of words. Hello? Who are you saying hello to? Hello?
Hi. Hey, love. Abala, Chaim Shali.
Why is Daniel get all the women?
I know,
It's not fair, bro.
He's not threatening. Hey, if you want to take it in the ass, you get all the women to do.
Or just the tip.
Yeah, if you want to learn how to give a good blowjob, you can probably get all the women to do. It's fair. We all have that option. Daniel, I'm going to leave that for you, though. So I cleaned my espresso today. I scaled it twice. My next espresso should be extra delicious.
Hey, if you have a little extra money, what do you spend it on? Go.
I donated it to
Donate it to the IDF.
Of course.
Donate it to the IDF.
Wow. Have you ever really donated to the IDF? I always think that's so funny when people donate to the IDF. Like, they need us to knit their...
Yes to the IDF. Yes to the IDF. Virgin in a minute. Because it's not virgin. That shit is a woman.
I'm giving it. I'm literally telling you. Get the fuck out this app. Fuck their schools. Fuck their jobs. All that. What?
Okay, this is The Fish by Crowley. Chapter 3, page 41, our first case. The Ark is a wretched, struggling village. A kind of outpost leading to nowhere in particular. 20 miles away to the west, across an interminable sea of pebbles and scrubs, rose a range of hills, yellow and red, with a dilapidated air. It reminded one of a gigantic street in process of demolition. No one had ever crossed them, or ever wanted to. The natives seemed to regard them a welcome addition to the scenery, on the ground that no robbers were likely to come from that direction. At any rate, they greeted our caravan apathetically, showed no alarm, no curiosity. They did not seem to want to sell us anything. They instinctively classed us with the masterless stray dogs that slunk about the streets, lean, scabby, savage, cowardly. They strode through the village. There seemed to be nothing to eat. The irrigation was haphazard, and the agriculture at the minimum compatible with living at all. They seemed utterly callous and hopeless, and in many of them I noticed serious symptoms of malnutrition. There was one boy in particular to whom I stopped to talk. He might have been 18 or 28, and he shrank at my approach in a very cautious, curious way. He was afraid, but not of me. It was more like stage fright. I offered a stick of chocolate. His eyes gleamed and every muscle twitched up with desire. But somehow he did not seem to be able to make up his mind to take it. In the end, he refused it. I went away toward camp feeling curiously irritated at the incident. After I had gone some 50 yards, I happened to turn around and found him shambling after me in an unusually furtive way. He caught my eye and slunk into a doorway. Just at the end of the village, it turned again and again. He had followed me. At this moment, my attention was altogether distracted by a spectacle, altogether out of keeping with the forlorn appearance of the village. It was a group, no, a little procession. They were all fat, jolly, dressed in bright colors, and with a headdress not unlike a mitre. The leader was a sort of one-man band, playing at the same time tom-tom, a pair of cymbals and a kind of primitive horn. A lot of clashing tin discs were hung about his person, thus slightly increasing the discord. Behind him marched a tall man with the mask of a sheep over his face, and the tip of a wolf's tail dangling between his legs. He carried a gilt pole with a white banner on which the word for fish in the local dialect was inscribed. Behind him again was a woman, very alluringly dressed, and from a strap on her neck was a large tray containing a sort of mayonnaise with all sorts of brightly colored garnishes. She had a huge hoarse voice, and she bawled unceasingly the virtues of her fish. If you were hungry, or thirsty, or tired, or sad, a portion of fish would put it right. Fish was food for the brain. Fish strengthened the nerves. Fish took away fear. Fish was used by all the leading people of society. Look what fish feeding has done for us. She bawled with particular emphasis that the fish was absolutely free to anyone who would accept it. The manners of the country even permitted her to offer a further inducement to anyone who would sample her wares, and she indicated the nature of the bonus by a very varied series of gestures. Following her came a figure intended to terrify, but which to my eyes appeared merely grotesque. He carried all sorts of arms, more than he could possibly use in any 3 battles. He wore a mask like a southern sea island demon. Behind him again, the last of the procession, almost hidden in the folds of his cloak, was a tiny dwarf, dressed in the most inconspicuous manner possible. Over his shoulders he carried a bag, almost as huge as himself. The attitude of the population to this procession was almost as indifferent as it had been to us. Without exception, they refused the fish. One elder, sitting outside his house, was near enough for me to catch his mutterings. Bad might it be, he said, and shook his head. The terrible accoutrements of the tallest man were apparently only for show. He raved and gesticulated, but nobody seemed particularly frightened of him, and he never proceeded to actual assault. All this time, my boy had been slinking up very stealthily. He was now not 20 yards away. The lady with the fish seemed to recognize in him a likely candidate, and took special pains to ogle him. He did not seem to care very much, but he wriggled and shuffled and fingered a little bag in his neck. The procession stopped to watch the duel. His nervousness increased, and so did her assurance. She lifted her plate right under his nose. At last he wearily drew his hand across his trembling brow, and then dipped it in the dish. He crammed the morsel into his mouth, and in that instant the dwarf ran out from the big man's cloak, clambered up the boy with monkey-like agility, and filched the little bag from his neck. He did not notice it. The leader renewed his noise with the vehemence of triumph, and the procession resumed its way.
So I was in my past life.
So that could be a problem. If I understand it, they can't deploy activities to polling places. So that's kind of law they're allowed to enforce. Their purview is very limited and sticks specifically to immigration laws and things surrounding immigration laws, like doing one's job without interfering. That often sticks there. So while I understand
It's like, I mean, I don't know, man. I don't really get it. You know, like all the ways they would speak in Farsi, they speak in English with a slight Persian accent. Yeah, I know. It's from the parents, and it's also from the fact that the entire community lives there. I mean, it's the highest population of Persians/Persian Jews in the world. So, I mean, of course, you can get around. Oh, not you. I was responding in the chat. That's why you can get away with not learning English for a really long time. You know? Yeah, it's totally different from Persians. anywhere in the United States, honestly. You know what I'm saying, Remy? It's crazy that they have that Persian accent when they speak. Be to all my dad.
Crazy.
What's up, Pete? B2, B3.
Okay.
What's going on?
Living the dream.
Are you a Jew? I'm just checking. No,
He satisfies both columns.
you don't have to answer. I was just checking. We're just vetting everyone that comes in the room.
For no particular reason.
Train tickets. You said it.
I know, it was funny when I said it, but you say it not so much.
You're being so big. You're a bigot.
I am. I'm okay with that.
Khaled said there needs more empathy and love in the world, and you're not practicing that. Yeah. When you're not strong, I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on. Anyway. And with that song, I'm going to bed. So, I'll see you all tomorrow. Roya June, your room. Oh, damn.
Oh, I found a picture of my dad. Hold on.
Picture of your
I found a picture of my dad.
Let's see. After seeing the photo of your dad, I'm gonna go. Daddy. See if you and Maras are brothers.
I think I put it in the right place.
Maybe your dad had a few travels.
Maybe. No, that didn't go to the right place. Why not?
Okay, this is the Fish McGrawley. Chapter 3, page 41, our first case. The Ark is a wretched, struggling village. A kind of outpost leading to nowhere in particular. 20 miles away to the west across an interminable sea of pebbles and scrubs. Rose a range of hills, yellow and red, with a dilapidated air. It reminded one of a gigantic street in process of demolition. No one had ever crossed them, or ever wanted to. The natives seemed to regard them a welcome addition to the scenery, and the ground and the robbers were likely to come from that direction. At any rate, they greeted our caravan apathetically, showed no alarm, no curiosity. They did not seem to want to sell us anything. They instinctively classed us with the nest of the stray dogs. They slunk about the streets, lean, scabby, savage, cowardly. They strolled through the village. There seemed to be nothing to eat. The irrigation was haphazard, and the agriculture at the minimum compatible with living at all. They seemed utterly callous and hopeless, and in many of them I noticed serious symptoms of malnutrition. There was one boy in particular to whom I sought to talk. He might have been 18 or 28, and he shrank at my approach in a very cautious and curious way. He was afraid, but not of me. It was more like stage fright. I offered a stick of chocolate. His eyes gleamed and every muscle twitched up with desire. But somehow he did not seem to be able to make up his mind to take it. In the end, he refused it. I went away toward camp feeling curiously irritated at the incident. After I had gone some 50 yards, I happened to turn around and found him shambling after me in an unusually furtive way. He caught my eye and slunk into a doorway. Just at the end of the village, it turned again and again. He had followed me. At this moment, my attention was altogether distracted by a spectacle. Altogether, out of keeping with the forlorn appearance of the village, it was a group, no, a little procession. They were all fat, jolly, dressed in bright colors, and with a headdress not unlike a mitre. The leader was a sort of one-man band, playing at the same time tom-tom, with various cymbals in a kind of primitive order. A lot of clashing tin discs were hung about his person, thus slightly increasing the discord. Behind him marched a tall man with the mask of a sheep over his face, the tip of a wolf's tail dangling between his legs. He carried a cane, banner on which the word for fish in the local dialect was inscribed. Behind him again was a woman, very alluringly dressed in front strap. On her neck was a large tray containing a sort of mayonnaise with all sorts of brightly coloured garnishes.
But a more considered opinion would be to say, if something like this ever did happen,
I got the shock of my life. The thing that happened next was incredible. My boy, his face smeared with the grease, staggered up to me and sputtered through his mouth of half-chewed fish. "Begone! Thou art unclean!" What could I do but burst out laughing? He broke into a string of abusive words. The situation was peculiarly awkward. It was, of course, the rule of the expedition never to have a row with a native, and at the same time never to stand any nonsense. I wish they had brought one of the Arabs with me. All I could do was speak to him sharply in a tone of authority. "Put yourself together." I said, "Be a man." He shrank back as if I had hit him, covered his face as if with excessive shame, moaned despairingly, "A man," again and again, and a new excessive intoxication seemed to seize him. He gave a muffled howl of delight, dropped on all fours. In his mouth he caught the deep dust of the road like a terrier, playing with a bone, and the ensemble of the picture was not attractive to my personal taste. Frankly, I must admit that the suddenness of these incidents completely startled my self-command. I had not even offered to inspect the fish, which I had come so far to study, and I had utterly failed to associate the boy's conduct with his acceptance of the mayonnaise. I now realized that here was my first case observed, as luck would have it, even before the poisoning, and the best thing I could do was to try to get him to come with me to the camp. When I pondered, he groveled, still gloating with ecstasy, still reviling his neighbors. We discovered later that he had no family, thus no one was responsible for him. But I heard the old man say into his beard that he was young and would be better presently. The boy now began to revile me because I was not made as he was, or clothed as he was, or acting as he was. He waxed extraordinarily bitter over my erect position. I think that something in him prevented him from revealing the contempt he expressed, that he was in fact enraged at himself for not being perfectly drunk. He changed his note at intervals to praise of the fish, in the exuberance of his newborn enthusiasm really surpassed the more polished but more hackneyed phrases of the salesman. I tried to appeal to both sides of his insanity. I told him that the people of the village were quite unworthy of him and would not heed him, but that in my camp there were plenty to do exactly as he said, but they had had no opportunity of hearing about the wonderful fish. I think the fart button is what really makes all of this, slapstick, because you have to understand that this is like mockery. This is like reverse mockery, essentially. I'm mocking the mockery about mockery
But there's a lot of just ridiculous. It's just such a ridiculous book. It's very funny, especially about the epidemics or the pandemics.
Hearing about the wonderful fish, and then he ought to go and tell them about it. No matter at what personal cost and risk, is a matter of duty. I added the fascination of a silver coin to that of my remarks. I really don't know whether he agreed to this, for he went on with his ravings, but he followed me, crawling on his belly and urging me to assume the only posture worthy of those glorious persons, the fish eaters. I humored him by saying that I suffered from stiff knee joints, and as I turned to go on, he made a kind of quick wriggle at me. He caught me by the heel to pull me down. He snatched my foot away and put 10 yards between us, and he crawled pitifully in my wake with his lungs bursting and his mouth now raving, now moaning, now laughing, now extracting the remains of the fish from the pockets of his cheeks and his hollow teeth, and champing it deliriously. In this fashion we arrived at the camp. I called Lyle out. I turned and saw to my surprise no less a personage than Mr. Moses Thornley. He displayed the usual cigar and erect expression on his countenance. I started in surprise, but all he said was, "The man that staged the procession had half an idea." In this fashion we arrived at the camp. I called Lyle out. It turned and saw to my surprise no less a personage than Mr. Moses Thornley. He displayed the usual cigar and wrapped an expression on his countenance. I started in surprise, but all he said was, "The man that staged that procession had half an idea." I pointed sternly to the boy, who had momentarily collapsed from exhaustion. He said, "It depends what you want him for. He's all right if you want to rob him or eat him. Not if you want him for your partner in business. It's the point of view." I snapped back at him. "The boy happens to be my partner in the business of life." And I turned and walked into the tent without another word. I came out again with a case of instruments. I wanted to examine the boy. He had recovered, and at the sight of Moses, turned loose his tongue in that direction. But the point of view did it again. Moses rose to the occasion and gave a combination of concerted action between a boot and a riding whip that was really admirable in its technique. The boy cringed and shrank and sobbed. The extraordinary action of the fish upon the brain entered a new phase. He kept on repeating, "How fortunate I am! How favored! How superior!" No one in any village a week's march all around could say that anything of the sort had ever happened to him. If you make the experiment of determining beforehand that you will use a form of inappropriate words in conjunction with almost any given gesture, you may be surprised at the difficulty of doing it. There was something unspeakably awful in the contradiction between the boy's words and his action. It suggested something so hideously wrong with the automatic machinery that underlies our limited conscious controls. Oh, what is this? What is the mathematician got a response for what's 1 divided by 0? Hello? Hello? I'm reading a book here, CM. Meanwhile, Lyle had rushed forward and thrust back the angry Jew. "Don't you know, you fool," he shouted, "that it's a blood insult? That boy will have your life, or all our lives. If he doesn't, his family will, or his village will." "He doesn't look very revengeful," sneered Moses. "These chaps have the spirit of wild horses." "Bah!" said the other, with a mocking grin. "I know more in a week of using my eyes than you've learned in all your years of travel." But Lyle had turned aside and was ruminating. "How the devil can we pacify him without insulting him?" he muttered. He started as the boy moved and writhed towards his tormentor. "Look out! He's got a knife!" roared Lyle. But Thornley stood like a rock. Lyle turned to me, almost staggered against me as he put his hand on my shoulder, and all his face went grayer than his eyes. I had myself been better prepared for what shocked Lyle. The boy was fumbling his hands at Moses' knee. He timidly touched the whip and put it to his lips. Then in a gush of excitement, he caught at the man's free hand and kissed it rapturously, while the tears streamed from his eyes. Thornley drew his hand away slowly and then turned it palm upwards. The lad fell into an agony of distress and beat his head repeatedly into the dust. When he glanced up at last, he saw the forefinger of that hand steadily pointed at the ground. His eyes followed it in a rapture of glee. He picked up the little silver coin, that I had given him and pressed it into the palm of the Jew. Moses slapped it into his pocket and with a kick in the chest sent the lad over backwards. The Nile had mastered himself. His face was grim and deadly. Moses did not even look at him. "Excuse me, gentlemen," he purred. "I should like to write up my diary." "So that's what we're up against," said Lyle half to himself. I was bending over the boy, who no longer repulsed me. He had gone off into a dead sleep, but I heard the muttered phrase, "One swallow doesn't make a summer," I retorted. Sarah, welcome. "One swallow doesn't make a summer," I retorted. "This is our first case. We have no reason for thinking it typical. In point of fact, an old man of the village who has probably seen plenty of cases thought it a very mild attack. When we've lived for a month in the bottomless pit, if we live," interrupted our leader. "If," I echoed. "If we do, I think we should be able to say we have seen something." I don't like it. The words came to my pursed lips. He swerved sharply as I spoke. "No, I'm not afraid." I flashed back to his quick glance. "But I'm damned if I like it." Chapter 4, The Salesman, page 47, The Fish, by Alistair Crowley. At dinner that evening, Lyle was even more taciturn than his wont. He smoked his pipe of strong black shag between courses, as the Russian smokes his cigarettes. Thornley had excused himself from dinner, and would not even have refreshments sent into his tent. He could hear his pen scratching furiously. One of his most curious habits was that he stuck to the old goose quill and sharpened his own nibs with a penknife. He used a peculiar ink of his own, too, singularly rich and black. He had a series of folio ledgers made for him of very thick cream ivory paper, and he even carried a supply of sand to serve instead of blotting paper. He had dozens of little affectations and eccentricities of this sort, which he seemed to use for the purpose of asserting his personality, just as a more vulgar type of Hebrew sports ostentatious jewelry. Such trifles undoubtedly contribute to emphasize the aggressive individuality of the man, and incidentally to frighten weak spirits away from him. I had noticed on the boat how the average passenger instinctively distrusted and avoided him. Yet there was not one of these stigmata which was intrinsically offensive or even obtrusive. I thought I detected that his galloping quill was morally vivisecting Lyle. I thought of a very tired man with insomnia worried by mosquitoes. I could understand it well enough. Thornley's actions showed at what capital importance he rated the incidents of the afternoon, that it seemed to him urgent to all disregard of personal comfort, that he should record his impressions while they were fresh, and record them in most meticulous detail. Lyle, on the other hand, was evidently both shocked and puzzled. And his pride gushed from 100 wounds as he thought with what contemptuous ease his enemy had outwitted and outfought him at every point of the duel. His distress increased visibly through the meal, and his appetite completely failed halfway through it. I thought that my bedside manner might interfere advantageously, and I remarked that despite the obvious debility of the boy before his poisoning and the disgusting and degrading symptoms, physical and moral, which followed it, it might well be that the prophylactic malaise caused by vaccination might be taken as a fair analogy. I pointed out that the salespeople were quite clearly in enjoyment of robust health, and carried on their business with vigor, efficiency, and enthusiasm, and that they were clearly on the best terms with themselves and the rest of the world. Lyle replied by reminding me that these facts did not agree with his earlier information. I had hoped he would not have remembered and I pressed my argument for the illustration of a boy with his first cigar. He waved his hand impatiently and knocked out a burning plug from his pipe on the edge of an untasted plate of couscous. I grant you everything, he growled, but friend Moses knows where he is, and friend Moses is perfectly happy. I know less than I did at first. When my enemy triumphs, I must put ashes on my head. We are well on the way to know, I cried I. We have a case to inform us, and we can cross-examine that procession and buy some of that fish and turn the searchlight on it. Don't worry. In another 24 hours, I will bring up artillery to support you. Moses, after all, has only bow and arrows. The explorer seemed to pluck up courage at this. Science always wins, he said. Knowledge is always power. But you know better than I what tempest savaged the frame. When the frame is too weak, was my riposte. But history is in the witness box. The spark lurked somewhere in the darkest ages. Presently, the tongue of flame leapt forth in Florence, in Oxford, in Smithfield, in Geneva. Everywhere, candles of Ridley and Latimer were never put out. The flame survived. The latter-day tempests have fanned it and spread it. The world is ablaze and the shadows have fled. I picked my clinical thermometer from my waistcoat pocket. Here is my witness. I said, we have learned to measure things. We insist that all things should be measured. We have established the unknown God and made him known, and his name is geometry. That is the victory of the Freemasons. Our pastoral staff is Franklin's lightning rod, our chalice a barrette, our sword a dividing engine, and our disc a galvanometer. The simplest necessities of life have come to depend on science. To go back to guesswork is as impossible as to go back to the jungle. Lyle shook his head. I can imagine a lecturer employing similar eloquence in Nineveh, Babylon, Tyre, the ruined cities of Ceylon. Why, man? Science itself tells you that all growth is a curve, all action a reaction. What came from nothing must go back to nothing. Our civilization is only a sort of skin disease to which the earth is subject. A boil that swells and bursts and leaves a scar scarce visible. I sprang to my feet in irritation. This is simply morbid. I said, quinine and caramel for you, and mixed them a dose from my pocket case. Yeah, swallow that, I said, and don't let abstract speculations unfit for your daily duties. Come and look at our patient. I had put the boy on a camp bed in my sleeping tent, where he lay in a state almost resembling coma. The lighting of the lamp seemed to rouse him. His state changed to one of low muttering delirium, in which one could only make out ecstatic phrases, interspersed with groans. It was sleep's imitation of his waking mania. His temperature had dropped, and he had sweated profusely. His eyes were wide open, the pupils fully dilated. In fact, all his reflexes had relaxed. The breath was exceedingly foul, and the nostrils were running profusely. I resolved upon decisive measures, injected a full dose of strychnine and digitalis, plunged him in a cold bath, and resorted to vigorous massage. In the course of an hour, he recovered consciousness, and I was able to administer a cup of strong meat broth fortified with iron and wine. He reacted so admirably to these measures that I determined to continue them throughout the night. By morning, he seemed to have shaken off the poison completely, and even to possess greater physical strength and moral stamina than when I had first accosted him. His mind was very confused. He did not seem to remember what he had been through, but in other respects his sanity and balance left nothing to be desired. He was able to take some solid food for breakfast, and then I told him to go home and not to eat any more fish. Now came an incident comically curious, which delighted both myself and Lyle, who was outside his tent putting together the parts of our aeroplane. I had said goodbye to the boy, who shook my hand with a manly warmth and vigor, which testified to the gratitude which he felt, and had no touch of civility. It turned to go, but had only covered a few yards when he was intercepted by Moses Thornley. The eyes of the latter lighted up with cruel and contemptuous joy. He deliberately dropped his cigar and motioned to the boy to pick it up. My patient took no notice and stepped aside so as to pass by. Thornley, with a look of angry surprise, planted himself again in the boy's way and ordered him gruffly to pick up the cigar for him. He turned back and did so, but with a glance and a gesture that would have warned a less confident bully.
Element. Order takers and trying to, just do what the president wants to do. And we see that even in the Epstein file, kind of saying that they wouldn't even try. I mean, they tried to say that it wasn't, there's nothing to investigate. And even with the pictures that, if people, I'm not going to talk about Epstein, even when people are telling you there's, pedophilia was happening there, and here are the pictures. The people on the pictures were not, there's nothing to investigate here. And Todd Blanche said, well, partying with a known pedophile in a pedophilia ring, I mean, that's not his words, but he said, partying with Epstein is not in itself a crime, but for sure you got crimes that happened there, and you got pictures of the people that perpetrated these crimes. Doesn't that at least invoke maybe we should investigate? No, the answer was no. My last thing is the Democrats must be the stupidest cheaters ever, because if they cheated in all the stuff that Trump is accusing the election cheat, I mean, we wouldn't have a Republican president by now. We wouldn't have a Congress that's being ruled by the Republicans. I don't know why we cheated. We cheated, and we ended up in a position like this. I looked at an article by the Brookings Institute about election fraud, and the amount of time that they investigations showed fraud. In Florida, where I live, there were 9 cases of election fraud in 2020 and 2022. Most of them were committed by people who were confused, or if they had the right to vote. That's in 2 years. There's some numbers in there about Texas that had since 2005. I got the shock of my life. The thing that happened next was incredible. My boy, his face smeared with grease, staggered up to me and spat into his mouth of half-chewed fish. Begone! Thou art unclean! What could I do but burst out laughing? He broke into a string of abusive words. The situation was peculiarly awkward. It was, of course, the rule of the expedition never to have a row with a native. At the same time, never to stand any nonsense. I wish they had brought one of the Arabs with me. All I could do was speak to him sharply in a tone of authority. Put yourself together. I said, be a man. He shrank back as if I had hit him, covered his face as if with incessant shame. Murmured despairingly a man again and again, then a new excessive intoxication seemed to seize him. He gave a muffled howl of delight, dropped on all fours. In his mouth he caught the deep dust of the road like a terrier, playing with a bow, and the ensemble of the picture was not attractive to my personal taste. Frankly, I must admit that the suddenness of these incidents completely startled my self-command. I had not even offered to inspect the fish, which I had come so far to study. I had utterly failed to associate the boy's conduct with his acceptance of the mayonnaise. I now realized that here was my first case observed, as luck would have it, even before poisoning. The best thing I could do was to try to get him to come with me to the camp. When I pondered, he groveled, still gloating with ecstasy, still reviling his neighbors. We discovered later that he had no family, thus no one was responsible for him. But I heard the old man say into his beard that he was young and would be better presently. The boy now began to revile me because I was not me as he was.
He put the cigar in his own mouth, took 2 quick strides toward his tyrant, and struck him square on the jaw. Thornley went down like a felled tree. The boy walked calmly over his body and went off to the village with the springy step and high held head of youth. The Jew picked himself up in a dazed fashion, but instead of pursuing his assailant, slunk cringingly into his tent. When I went in to see if he was hurt, I found him crouched behind his bed, brandishing a pair of revolvers. He rebuffed my inquiries growingly, and I went over to Lyle disgusted. Our leader had been watching the scene radiant. He seemed absolutely renewed by the incident. We exchanged a few sarcasms at the expense of the banker's agent, and Lyle replied emphatically that he had been sure that the boy's blood and race guaranteed his spirit, that the poison could not take hold on anyone that was not already cachectic from some deconstitutional taint. Leucocytes, he shouted. Fresh air, sunlight, obsolence. There lies our surety. I agreed with him heartily, but pointed out that the incident rather complicated our puzzle than otherwise. Just so, said he cheerfully, but you can't hope to put a puzzle together until you have got all the pieces, and up to that point, every new one makes it look more of a muddle. Come up to the village, said I. Let's try and locate the procession. But even as I said the words, the air was insulted by the distant pandemonium of the one-man band, and we could see the banner jerked up and down over the mud wall of the village. 3 minutes later, it was evident that the salesmen intended to canvass our expedition. On they came jauntily, swinging with lusty strides, their grotesque braveries gory in the raw sunlight against the dusty orange ochre of the horizon. We heard Ali shouting vehement orders to his Arab staff, who ran up with their rifles slung from their shoulders, cracking their rhinoceros-hide whips. The two biggest seized the head man, who was also the contractor, and our gang of carriers, and told him that he should pay with his skin for any breach of discipline among his men. He took this Gentile hint as seriously as it was given. He got his men ranged up in first-rate shape, and treated them to a series of barks and years which we took to mean that he would stand no nonsense. Ali himself headed off the procession as it approached, and his Arabs covered it with their rifles. The salesman wheeled, then Lyle and I ran up and told Ali that we wished to talk with them. The Arab gave way rather grudgingly. He washed his hands of his bad English masters, as one might say. The procession halted and began to go through the regular performance. I explained to the woman that I did not want to take her fish for nothing, that I would pay her price. It was as if I had not spoken. She merely urged me to eat, and that with the most fantastic eagerness. She actually foamed at the mouth, and the sweat streamed from her face, her wrinkles inspecked with rivulets of miry paint. She was obscene and nauseating. I had provided myself with a box of tin-lined glass for reception, the specimen which I proposed to analyze. This I took from my pocket, and proceeded to fill it with a platter. The action seemed to anger her. "No, no," she screamed. "You must eat it at once. Eat, eat." I told her very politely that I had just had my breakfast, and added a remark in perfect innocence, whose effect I could hardly have foreseen in a nightmare. "I don't want it to eat," I said. "I only want it for scientific examination." The hag went into convulsions, uttering the most fearful screams. And on the instant the dwarf ran out from under the cloak and addressed his companions in sharp, short tones of command. The malice and fierceness utterly inhuman, and evidently pushed to a pitch of what seemed to me almost insane intensity, by some inexplicable but most soul-staggering fear. His manner left no doubt that he was the real leader of the gang, that the others were merely his hirelings. Never in any freak museum have I seen so ghastly a deformity. One asked oneself how nature could have come to a mood of such perverted madness as to dream so grievous an abortion. He was about 4 feet high, his arms so long as nearly to touch the ground. They seemed immensely strong, and the hands were enormous. I never saw bigger or as big on the heftiest lumberman. The nails were strong and sharp, almost like the claws of a hyena or of some carrion bird, and the fingers were gnarled and knotted like an old sailor's. The thumb was extremely short, crooked, and appeared to be of only one phalange. Splayed feet with practically no instep terminated short, thick legs, whose bones were curiously twisted. So broad were the hips, and so narrow the shoulders, that the body was shaped like a fig. The paunch was immense and distended. The spine was curved almost to the arc of a circle, and the head was set on the shoulders, or rather between them, with no visible neck. The skull was immense and hideously misshapen. Ragged wisps of long grey mangy hair were matted on a scalp of parchment-like ochre, with blotches of black scab that suggested the inscriptions of some dead evil race. A dirty white beard straggled meagerly from the sharply jutting chin. I thought of the ram of a warship. The mouth was long and straight, with lips so white, so flat, that they could scarcely be distinguished. The teeth were like a wolf's, but black and rotten. Scraps of raw meat, sticking in the gaps, showed red against the brown of the swollen gums, whose edges oozed with pus. The nose was eaten away, apparently by lupus or by a rodent ulcer. The cheeks were fallen and wrinkled, their skin dry and dull like a rotten orange. The forehead was receding, the whole face prognathous, in fact, but enormously bulged on the left temple and caved in on the right, the dome being thus a sort of skewed cone. The eyelids were raw red, the eyes were black. They were covered with a film, a whitish, yellowish membrane. Greed, cunning, malice seemed to incarnate in the expression. I was able to observe him, or more accurately, it with great exactness. For in his furious scurry, his black hooded cloak had fallen off, and he pranced naked in the sunshine. Naked, except that about his trunk, beneath his arms, a broad iron ring was welded into this by a short, heavy chain, was riveted in the steel box in which he stored his gains. I only caught one word of his frenzied jabberings, my one word examination. But his psychology was as obvious as his anatomy. I can perhaps best convey it by saying that it was as if a very pitiful coward had been lulled into security, and then most suddenly confronted with his fear, an anguish so intense that it surpassed itself and makes him fight instead of turning tail. The noise, as I suppose, had attracted Moses to our group. I saw him just behind the dwarf. He was standing alert and resolute, quick, anxious eyes and nostrils widely dilated. "Look out, doctor!" he shouted. "Get to cover, they mean mischief." I am so slow and stupid, so unable to grasp unsympathetic psychologies, that I simply failed to understand. I was bewildered utterly by this senseless storm in a teacup. But the dwarf's men took weapons from the surplus of the boogeyman and scattered so as to surround me. Even the woman threw down her platter and caught up a rope, painted to represent a snake. While I stood there gaping like a gaby, she flung a noose round my legs and brought me heavily to the ground. The others with whoops of triumph rushed at me. They battered me. They stabbed me. They trampled me. Luckily, it was only for a moment. Thornley, with great presence of mind, threw down a handful of coins, and my assailants turned to scramble for them. "Get to cover, you damned ass," he yelled, and this time I knew my lesson. I crawled as best I could to my tent and began to count my wounds. By this time, Ali had seen what was wrong. He and his Arabs formed line and charged with drawn scimitars. Salesmen did not wait for the attack. They fled in disorder, leaving most of their apparatus on the field of battle. The leader had disappeared long since. He was inconceivably quick on his feet, awkward as they looked, and he had the trick of silence in withdrawing. It was as if he had slipped suddenly into the earth, the swift stealth of the scared lizard. In his rage, our headman ordered all these things to be piled up and burnt, which was a pity, for some of their finery was really rare and valuable. There were old and irreplaceable things among them, and apart from their intrinsic worth, they would have been of inestimable service to me in certain phases of my investigations. Lau, by the way, had come off nearly as ill as I, for at the first onset the dwarf had stabbed him in the thigh with a little crooked dagger, which proved to have had poison on the blade. It was an innocent-looking toy constructed cunningly of glass, cloudy white and very brittle. The hilt was shaped like an owl, perched, so to say, on guard, which was a crescent moon. It had on it a sacred verse bitten in with some acid. I may translate this roughly as follows: "Scar thy skin, eat thine heart, fog thy brain, drink thy tears, shrink with shame from all thou art, breathe but lies, feed on fears. This is thy duty, man. This is God's perfect plan." On the hilt were these words in a spiral scroll. I translate once more: Dare not to stand upright. Dare not to think or know. Dare not to use thy might. Dare not to face thy foe. Dare not to do thy will. Dare not to love thy mate. Dare not to live thy fill. Be feeble, fool of fate. His daggers are manufactured wholesale, as we learnt later in the bottomless pit in the section called Akaratia, which word means, so they say, innocence or purity. But it is evident from the etymology that it originally meant lack of power. By a similar process among ourselves, the Greek ascetic or trained athlete has come to signify a physically starved and stunted person. The self-denial with an object of the man in training became valued for its own sake as a virtue. Virtue itself, again, really means the quality of manhood. Yet we now use it too often of qualities possibly angelic, but by no means manly. The poison is the natural juice of a flowerless weed that grows on the slopes above Akratia. They call it poetically enough, path, nor, ya, river of chastity, or etymologically the white that flows, and claim that by rubbing the body with it daily, night and morning, they are immune from practically all the ills of life. But I anticipate my story. Lyle was very severely... Okay, we'll come right back to that. Lyle was severely infected by this venom. He relapsed constantly in spite of all I could do. The symptoms were nervousness, exhaustion, anemia, fainting spells, cardiac weakness, headaches, and hypochondria with delusions of persecution. Only his constitution pulled him through. I had just finished dressing my wounds when I heard the steps of Thornley. He came to inquire how I was. He made himself at home in my tent with quiet assurance, mixing himself a drink, settling down apparently for a long conversation. Doctor, he began, I don't talk much, but when I do, I have something to say. You don't like me, you don't trust me, you don't understand me. Don't wriggle, I know. What's more, you never will. It doesn't matter. We can get on well enough, that's the point, if we make a little deal, eh? What about, I said rather shortly, for I ached all over and wanted to rest. About your research, let me say straight off I'm with you. I never knew harm come of knowing too much or too little, all the harm there is in the long run. I'll give you some facts here and now, not science perhaps, but useful for all that, or I miss my guess. Firstly, I've got into the business side of this fish graft. Those salesmen are never allowed to touch it, on pain of losing their jobs. They'll give a fish addict a job now and then when it suits them to advertise, come where the booze is cheaper. Traction of the product or need to demonstrate sincere enthusiasm, or a marvelous recovery from sickness, and so on. But they cure the new man by slow stages. Often he never really got it in his system, and he is taught the art of salesmanship in the regular way. There's no doubt about the effect of the fish. I've collected some samples for you, by the way. It's a foul poison of the dope species. It softens the brain, hardens the heart, and corrupts the blood and destroys the reproductive faculty. Its use turns a man into a sniveling, lying, slavish rogue without self-respect, courage, wit, or any of the generous emotions. You certainly seem to have found out a lot. I came out here to report to my principals. There's more yet which you may as well know. I found out where the fish is bred, and I'm going to take you to see it. Meanwhile, let me give you a hint. Nothing frightens people so much as inquiry. You've had a lesson today. Go on with your work, but let no one know what you're doing. I have a soft spot in my own skin, too. I can't afford to have anyone know that I'm helping you. That's all, I think. But when you've analyzed that fish, I should like you to tell me about it. I promised gladly enough, and we shook hands for the first time since our introduction. He went out of my tent, and I sank into a sleep which was peopled by dreams of the most fantastic order. But underneath the whirling images of my fancy, there was a dull ache of resentment against the darkness and confusion. I yearned for the clear light of day, and for an universe ordered and intelligible. Analysis. Okay, we're gonna stop here. It's a lot of reading. Hope you've enjoyed it. Please subscribe. It was 2 hours and 40 minutes. We've been reading The Fish. Got a lot of edits here. Value for its own sake is a virtue. Virtue itself again really means the quality of manhood. If we now use it too often of qualities possibly angelic, but by no means
against what the administration is doing. That is really very, very fortunate. But so I think what are the choices for the regular people, for voters like us? I don't know. I think for me, the best chance is to hope that some decision will be obeyed by the administration if it's job to come unconstitutional actions taken by the administration, whether it's due process or whether it's any other freedom of speech, etc., etc. That's certainly just wishful thinking. It really just shows the fragility of our constitution, of our system. I used to tend to believe that it's an ironclad system. It just takes one of the three branches to do its job. Now I realize that if we have a hooligan in one of the branches, which in my mind is this administration, then the other two branches, there's not that much they can do to actually rectify the situation. So other than that, I don't have a lot of positive things to say. But the way, the duty, the problem is you, Gary, picking such a terrible, heavy topic, that hopeless topic. Maybe we can talk about something else, like your
Well, I missed the suggestion because you were underwater for that, but I'm open to all suggestions on topics for us to use. But you mentioned court orders not followed by the administration, and Breyer also mentioned that a federal judge, who was a Republican-appointed judge, admonished the administration for not following court orders. He gave a number. Do you know how many court orders he said were not followed thus far by this president? More than that. Michaela, followed by Hermes.
Half of my family's from Nebraska and the other half from Minnesota. So most of them are Catholic Democrats, but a lot of them have left the party because of big pro-life issues. About the elections, I think that maybe the federal government could have a legitimate part in helping the states. That CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency, I think that's what it's called. They look at voting systems and point out vulnerabilities, but they have no power to enforce any of what they found. It's up to the states to do that. And they did find vulnerabilities in Dominion in 2022. There's no evidence. They didn't say there was any evidence that those had been exploited. But I do think that the federal government should have a role there. And I think some of their suggestions were that all of the parts of the voting systems be manufactured in the U.S. And I would go for that.
Because anything that was manufactured outside these states is subject to tampering?
Well, that we could have more, oversight over it.
I would.
Legal oversight.
But you're making that recommendation without there being any evidence of there being any problems, right?
Yeah, but we wouldn't know because we wouldn't have oversight. We wouldn't have laws that they'd have to comply to,
I'm sure there's oversight, and I'm sure there are laws that they have to comply with, but
that's one of their suggestions.
So let me give you an example. It's nothing to do with elections. The federal government has certain safety standards and EPA standards that auto manufacturers must adhere to. If your car is imported from Germany, do they still have to follow those standards and regulations?
I suppose so, but I don't know. That was one of their suggestions.
Yeah. Okay.
Suggestions. Yeah.
Okay.
They must have had a reason for it.
Okay. Thank you, Michaela. Appreciate that. Hermes, you get the last word.
Maurice?
Yeah,
Last word, buddy. Last word, buddy. Don't blow it.
No. So, there's not much to say. Everything that needed to be said has been said. And I just hope that, we can change things and turn things around and heal our country. Thank you, Gary.
I love ending on an optimistic note. Folks, we're here Monday through Friday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. New York time. So till 5 p.m. New York time tomorrow. For the next edition of the Critical Thinking Forum, everybody be safe, be well, and peace out.
Music, where he oversaw day-to-day operations. Pew had previously overseen the label's promotion and marketing strategies as Executive Vice President of Urban Music and is credited with leading Epic's urban team to great success, including becoming #1 urban record label of the year of 2017. Preceding that role, Pew was Senior Vice President of Promotion at Universal Music Group's Island, Def Jam, where he helped propel Rihanna and Kanye West to stardom, among many others. After a near-fatal car accident in 2014, Pew had a desire to tell his story. Pew was previously Vice President of Promotions at MCA Records for 7 years and launched his career as Regional Promotional Manager for Motown Records. Having worked multiple jobs since the age of 11, Pew always wanted to be an entrepreneur. While working in the music industry, he started investing his bonuses into real estate and eventually created LJ Britt Enterprises, a real estate management company that has